My dad emotionally abandoned me for 10 years to prioritize my stepsister, but when he missed my wedding for her graduation, I banned him from meeting his future grandkids and left him with no family. I'm 29 years old. I'm a freelance journalist, and honestly, I need to write this out because if I don't get it out of my system, I think I'm going to explode. What happened at my wedding 6 months ago was basically the straw that broke the camel's back after years. And when I say years, I'm talking about like a whole decade of feeling invisible in my own family. I guess I should start at the beginning, when I was 16 and my parents got divorced. It wasn't an ugly divorce, one of those with screaming and fighting. It was more like one of those where they just realized they didn't work together anymore. My mom kept the house. I stayed with her, and my dad moved to an apartment like 20 minutes away. At first, everything seemed normal. Or as normal as a divorce can be. You know what I mean? The thing is that my dad met someone almost immediately after the divorce. And when I say immediately, I mean literally. Not even 6 months passed before he told me he had met an unmarried, incredible woman and wanted me to meet her. I was like 16 and a half at that point, and honestly, I wasn't ready for that, but, well, what could I do? The woman's name was, let's say, Susan. I'm not going to use real names, and she had 2 daughters, Charlotte, who was a year younger than me, and Clara, who was like 12. The first time I met them, everything was super awkward. That kind of situation where everyone is trying to be super nice, but nobody really knows what to say. Charlotte barely looked at me. Clara was glued to her phone, and Susan wouldn't stop talking about how excited she was that we were all going to be one big happy family. I remember thinking, okay, this is weird, but I guess I can handle it. My dad and Susan got married literally a year after the divorce. 1 year. My mom by then had already started dating someone too, a guy named Mike, who was a middle school teacher and who honestly was super calm and nice. But my dad got married first, and I felt like everything happened too fast. The wedding was small, nothing extravagant, but I remember that Charlotte wore a dress that matched Susan's, and I wore one my mom had bought me, and I felt completely out of place. I should have seen it coming from that moment. Seriously. But I was 17 years old and didn't understand anything at all. The first few months after they got married were weird. I would visit my dad on weekends. The typical shared custody arrangement, even though technically I was old enough to decide. And every time I went, Charlotte was there. Obviously. Because she lived there. At first I tried to get along with her, like making conversation, asking her about school, that kind of stuff, but she always answered me with monosyllables or just went to her room. Clara was easier to deal with. She at least talked to me. But Charlotte had this attitude of like, you don't belong here, that I could feel every time I was in that house. And my dad acted like he didn't notice anything. Every time Charlotte needed something, he would jump to help her. If she wanted to go to the mall, he would take her. If she needed help with homework, he would drop whatever he was doing with me to help her. At first, I thought he was just trying to be a good stepfather. Make her feel welcome. But then it became a pattern. When I started college, at like 18, I decided to study journalism because I had always liked writing and telling stories. I got into a university that was about 2 hours away from my mom's house, so I moved to campus. My dad helped me with the move, which was nice, but I remember that the whole time he was texting. And when I asked him what was going on, he said that Charlotte was nervous about her first day of her senior year of high school, and that Susan needed his advice on what to tell her. Like, okay, I understand that's important, but we were in the middle of setting up my stuff in my dorm room, and he was more focused on his phone than helping me. I should have said something at that moment, but I didn't because I didn't want to seem selfish or jealous. Things started to get really bad when my sophomore year of college came around. I had been working super hard, getting good grades, writing for the student newspaper, doing everything to build my portfolio, and I got an interview for an incredible internship at a pretty well-known newspaper. It was an opportunity that could have literally launched my career. Like, it was competitive and hard to get, and I was super excited. I told my dad, and he said he was proud, that it was great, but when I asked him to come to the city to celebrate with me because I had gotten the internship, he said he couldn't because he had to take Charlotte to visit colleges that weekend. Okay, fine, not the end of the world. But it hurt a little because I felt like this was important to me. But what really changed everything, the moment that still makes me angry, when I think about it, was when I was 20 years old and my appendix burst. Literally. burst. I was in my student apartment. By then, I was already living off campus. And I started feeling this unbearable pain in my stomach, like I thought I was going to die. My roommate took me to the hospital, and it turned out that my appendix had burst, and I needed emergency surgery immediately. I called my mom. She and Mike were there in 2 hours, literally dropped everything and drove like crazy to get there. I called my dad and left him a voicemail because he didn't answer. I explained the situation, told him I was in the hospital and was going to have surgery. He called me back like 3 hours later, when I was already in recovery, and asked me how I was. I told him it had been terrifying, but that I was okay. And he told me he was so sorry, but he couldn't come see me because Charlotte had just broken up with her boyfriend and was devastated, and Susan needed him to be there to support them. Wait, let me repeat that so it's clear. My appendix had burst. I had had emergency surgery, and he didn't come because my 9-year-old stepsister had broken up with her boyfriend. Can you believe it? At that moment, I was so doped up on medication that I just said okay and hung up. But when the effect of the drugs wore off and I actually processed what had happened, I was furious. He didn't come visit me at all, not even when I was already home recovering. He sent me flowers, yes, with a card that said, "Get well soon. I love you." But he didn't come. And the worst part is that because of being in the hospital and then in recovery, I lost the internship I had gotten. Literally. The newspaper told me they were very sorry, but they needed someone who could start immediately, and I obviously couldn't, so they gave it to someone else. Like 2 months after that, there was a family dinner at my dad's house. It was Susan's birthday or something. I don't remember exactly, but I went because my mom told me I should try to maintain a relationship with my dad despite everything. During dinner, Charlotte was bragging about her new boyfriend, about how my dad had met him and given him his approval, and I couldn't help it. I just blurted out something like, "How nice that dad had time to meet your boyfriend, considering he didn't have time to visit me when I almost died." The silence at that table was awkward to the max. My dad looked at me like I had thrown cold water on him and said this wasn't the time or place for that conversation. I told him, when would be the time then? Because I had been waiting like 3 months to talk about it. Susan tried to calm the situation by saying that we all understood it had been a difficult time for everyone, and I literally told her no, it hadn't been difficult for everyone. It had been a medical emergency for me and a teenage breakup for Charlotte, and that my dad had chosen the latter. Charlotte got up from the table crying. My dad told me I was being dramatic and cruel, and I left. I didn't talk to him for like 4 months after that. Eventually, we reconciled. Like, he called me and we met for coffee and talked. He told me he felt like I had always been resentful of Charlotte and that he was just trying to be a good stepfather. I told him the problem wasn't that he was a good stepfather. The problem was that he stopped being a good father to me in the process. He said he was going to try to do better, that he loved me, and I wanted to believe him because he was my dad, you know? So we tried to rebuild the relationship. I kept visiting him. We would go to lunch from time to time. We talked on the phone more often. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. I met Nathan when I was 25, at a journalism conference of all things. He worked in digital marketing, and we were both on a panel about media in the digital age or something like that. We clicked immediately. Like, we went out for coffee after the panel and talked for hours. We started dating like 2 months after meeting, and honestly, he was the first person who really listened to me when I told him about the whole situation with my dad and Charlotte. He didn't judge me. He didn't tell me I was exaggerating. He just listened to me and validated me and made me feel like my feelings mattered. We got engaged after 2 years of dating, when I was 27. It was super special. He proposed to me on a hike we do, often near where we live. Nothing extravagant, but perfectly us. We announced our engagement in January, and we decided we would get married in September of that same year. I told my family, including my dad, and everyone seemed happy for me. My mom and Mike were super excited. My dad congratulated me and asked about the plans. We started planning the wedding. We booked the venue, hired the photographer, all that stuff. It was stressful but exciting. You know, everything it's supposed to be when planning a wedding. In March, like 2 months after we announced our engagement, Charlotte announced that she had also gotten engaged. Okay, cool. Congratulations to her. But then, and this is where things got weird, she announced that her wedding would be in September, on the exact same date as mine. The same day. Literally, the same day. When I found out, I sent her a text asking if she had realized it was the same date as my wedding. She replied with something like, "Oh yeah, I know, but it's the only date that worked for us because it's the anniversary of when we met or something. So I hope you don't mind." Don't mind. As if it were a total coincidence and not a super calculated move. I told my dad, expecting him to see how weird it was, but he told me it was probably just a coincidence and that there were many weekends in September, that surely Charlotte hadn't done it on purpose. I asked him what he was going to do then, which wedding he was going to go to, and there was this long silence, and then he said he would have to think about it. I have to think about it, as if it were a difficult decision between his biological daughter's wedding and his stepdaughter's wedding. Like 2 weeks passed and finally my dad called me. He told me he had decided to go to Charlotte's wedding and walk her down the aisle because she really wanted him to do it and it would be devastating for her if he wasn't there. I asked him, what about me? What about it being devastating for me that my own father wouldn't be at my wedding? And he told me that I had Mike, that Mike could walk me down the aisle, and that I was stronger than Charlotte and could handle it better. I was stronger. As if that were an excuse to treat me like a second choice again. I hung up the phone and cried for hours. Nathan hugged me and told me to take a breath, to think about what we wanted to do, if we wanted to change the date or what. But you know what? I decided I wasn't going to change my date. It had been my date first. I had booked my venue first. And I'm going to let Charlotte manipulate me into changing my plans. So I went ahead with planning my wedding. Mike, my stepfather, when he found out about the whole situation, called me aside one day and told me it would be an honor for him to walk me down the aisle if I wanted. I almost started crying right there because this man who technically had only been in my life for like 5 or 6 years was willing to do what my own father wouldn't do. I told him yes, that I would love for him to walk with me. The months passed and I kept planning my wedding, trying not to think about my dad and Charlotte. My mom was incredible during all this. She helped me with all the details, went with me to try on dresses, everything. Nathan and I decided we wanted a medium-sized wedding, like 80 people, at a nice place with gardens. We invited my dad anyway because, I don't know, part of me hoped he would change his mind or something. He RSVP'd but never asked about the details, never offered to help with anything, nothing. It was like he was fulfilling an obligation rather than really wanting to be there. The wedding day arrived. I was nervous and excited and all that mix of emotions you're supposed to feel. I was at the venue getting ready with my bridesmaids. My mom was there helping me with my dress. Everything was going well. And then, 2 hours before the ceremony was supposed to start, my dad showed up. Literally, showed up without warning at the wedding venue. One of my cousins came to tell me he was out there asking to talk to me, and I thought, okay, maybe he came to wish me luck or apologize or something. I went out to talk to him, and the first thing he told me was Charlotte uninvited me from her wedding this morning. She said that I didn't appreciate all the effort she had put into planning it, and that if I really loved her, I would cancel all my plans to be there with her. And when I told her I had already confirmed I would be there, she got mad and told me not to come. I stood there processing what he had just said. I mean, basically Charlotte had manipulated him for months, making him choose between us. And when he chose to go to her wedding, she punished him by uninviting him because he hadn't also canceled his RSVP to my wedding. It was so twisted I almost laughed. But then my dad said, "So now I can walk you down the aisle like it should have been from the beginning." As if he were doing me a favor. As if I were his second choice, and now that his first choice had rejected him, he could settle for me. I told him no, that Mike was going to walk me down the aisle as we had planned. My dad got angry, said he was my father and he had a right to walk me down the aisle. I told him that he had lost that right when he decided to go to Charlotte's wedding instead of mine, when he made me feel like I was the B option my whole life. He started raising his voice, saying I was being unfair, that he had made a mistake but now he was there. That should count for something. I told him he could stay at the wedding as a guest if he wanted, but Mike was going to walk me down the aisle, and that was my final decision. At that moment, Mike came out to see what was happening because someone had told him there was a situation. My dad saw him and told him to step aside, that this wasn't his place, that he was the real father and Mike was just the guy his mom married. Mike stayed calm, told my dad he needed to leave or we were going to have to call security. My dad literally tried to push Mike, like physically pushed him, and Mike didn't even respond, just stood there. 2 of my cousins and Nathan had to intervene to separate my dad, and we ended up having to call venue security to escort him out. It was a scene, literally a dramatic scene 2 hours before my wedding. I locked myself in the prep room and cried for like 20 minutes. I thought this was going to ruin the whole day, that I wasn't going to be able to enjoy my own wedding because my dad had come to make it all about him again. But my mom came in and hugged me and told me she wasn't going to let him ruin this day for me, that this was my day and I deserved to be happy. My bridesmaids helped me touch up my makeup. Nathan sent me a super sweet message saying he loved me and couldn't wait to marry me, and somehow I pulled myself together. The ceremony was beautiful. Mike walked me down the aisle and squeezed my arm in support the whole way. When we got to the altar, and the officiant asked, "Who gives this woman away?" Mike said, "Her mother and I," and kissed my forehead before going to sit down, and I honestly almost lost my composure right there. The ceremony was perfect. Nathan and I exchanged vows that we had written ourselves. We kissed when they declared us husband and wife, and we walked down the aisle as newlyweds. The reception was fun. We danced, we ate, we toasted. Everything was like we had dreamed it. I tried not to think about my dad, tried not to think about how he wasn't there for the father-daughter first dance that we didn't even plan, because I knew he wouldn't be there. Instead, Mike asked me to dance during the reception, and it was one of the most special moments of the night. After the wedding, Nathan and I went on our honeymoon for 2 weeks. When we got back, there were like 15 messages from my dad asking to talk. I agreed to meet him at a neutral coffee shop. He started by saying he was hurt by how I had treated him on my wedding day, that I had humiliated him in front of the family. I literally couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told him that he had humiliated me my whole life, that he had made me feel like I didn't matter, like I was always second after Charlotte. He told me I was exaggerating, that he had tried to be a good father to both, that it wasn't his fault I was so insecure. Insecure, as if all these years of being ignored and put in second place were just my insecurities and not consequences of his actions. There was a family gathering like 2 months after the wedding. It was Christmas or something like that, and I went because I wanted to see my grandparents and my cousins. My dad was there with Susan, Charlotte, and Clara. It was super awkward from the moment I arrived. Charlotte looked at me and just nodded her head. Didn't even congratulate me on the wedding or anything. During dinner, my dad made some passive-aggressive comments about how some people don't appreciate the sacrifices their parents make for them, and I knew it was directed at me. My cousin, who had been at my wedding and had seen all the drama, pulled me aside afterwards and told me she had heard from one of Charlotte's cousins that Charlotte had chosen that specific date because she wanted to prove that my dad would choose her over me. It was some kind of twisted loyalty test, and my dad had fallen right into her trap. When I mentioned this to my dad, he flatly denied it, said my cousin was causing drama, that Charlotte would never do something like that. But things kept coming to light. Another cousin told me that Charlotte had been telling the extended family that I was the one who had caused all the problems, that I had been cruel to her for years, that I was jealous of her relationship with my dad. Literally, she had been building this narrative where she was the victim and I was the villain, and some family members had believed her. That's when I decided I needed to have a serious conversation with my dad and establish real boundaries. I arranged a meeting with him, without Susan, without Charlotte, just him and me. I brought him a list, literally a written list of all the times he had made me feel invisible, from the appendix surgery to the wedding, everything. I told him I needed him to acknowledge that he had consistently prioritized Charlotte over me and that it had hurt me deeply. He got defensive at first, but when he saw I wasn't going to back down, he finally admitted that maybe he had been too indulgent with Charlotte. Too indulgent, as if that were the problem. I told him that if he wanted to have a relationship with me in the future, he needed to treat me as an equal priority, not as a second choice. I also told him I was going to be no contact with Charlotte for an indefinite time because her behavior had been manipulative and toxic, and I needed to protect my mental health. My dad didn't take that last part well, told me I was being dramatic, that Charlotte was my sister and that family should forgive each other. I told him that Charlotte was technically my stepsister, not my sister, and that forgiveness required someone to acknowledge they had done something wrong, which Charlotte had never done. We ended the conversation without really resolving anything, but at least I had said what I needed to say. Now, 6 months after the wedding, my relationship with my dad is basically non-existent. We talk maybe once a month, superficial conversations about the weather and work, nothing deep. I haven't spoken to Charlotte since the wedding, and honestly, I have no plans to do so anytime soon. I've been going to therapy to process all this, and my therapist has helped me understand that it wasn't my responsibility to fix this relationship, that I had done everything possible, and that it's okay to set boundaries with toxic family. Nathan has been incredible through all this. He and my mom and Mike have been my real family. Last week, my dad sent me a message asking if we could try to rebuild our relationship, that he missed me. I responded that I was open to that, but it would have to be on my terms, with clear boundaries, and that it would take time. I haven't gotten a response yet, so I don't know what's going to happen. Part of me hopes he finally understands what he did to me, but another part no longer has hope. And that's okay, I guess. I've learned that I can't control other people's actions. I can only control how I respond and what I allow in my life. And right now, I'm focusing on building my life with Nathan, on my career, and on the relationships that really nurture me. It's enough for now.